What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are back with another free agent breakdown for the Detroit Lions. And today, we are here with a signing that happened late in the process for the Detroit Lions in free agency. Yet, it could be a very effective addition this upcoming season. So let's get it started. Welcome, everybody, to our video. Glad you guys are here. And yes, we are back to break down a signing that I'm very excited about. I was very excited at the time, but I was more so excited to dive into what this player had been doing the past couple of seasons. Because since he's been gone, since he's been in Jacksonville, I didn't really keep up with anything that he was doing in Jacksonville, so I was just kind of unaware of what he was still bringing to the table. So when we signed this player back this offseason, I was excited, of course. I think everybody was excited when they saw that the Lions had re-signed Marvin Jones Jr. You remember what that guy did for us? He was massive. When we added this guy in free agency, he was a huge addition. He's a former 5th-round pick by the Cincinnati Bengals, came in, paired up with Kenny Golladay, and it was a massive addition for the Lions. And then he left. There was a turnover within the Lions regime. We know Kenny Golladay went out and got a big deal. Jamal Agnew also went to Jacksonville. Marvin Jones Jr. left, and at that point, the Lions financially were in a pretty tough situation, so we had brought in a lot of prove-it deals, a lot of cheaper deals, and still some of those guys have stuck around, like Khalif Raymond. He's still here. He got an extension since that time. A couple years later, back in free agency, one of the late additions that we made, it wasn't one of your first or second day signings. It wasn't a long-term deal, but we know that this is one of those positions where usually when you give out big deals in free agency to the receiver position, it usually goes wrong. On this 1-year deal, there is a void year next season, which is set at about $800K, only a $2.2 million cap hit. So it's essentially like a 1-year, $3 million deal. Not a very big contract for Marvin Jones Jr., but as I said, this is one of those positions where you've been able to sign some of these guys on cheaper contracts, and they've been able to come in and be effective. Now, a difference here with Marvin Jones Jr., number one, is the age. He's 33 years old at this point in time. This is not a deal that the Lions are giving out or that anybody would probably give out saying, hey, prove it and we'll give you this big extension. With his age at this position, that's probably not in the cards. So that's part of the reason that I would assume his contract was not very expensive. When we signed DJ Chark, he wasn't coming off a super, productive season. And Marvin Jones Jr. has been pretty productive his entire career. Like, this past season was the least productive he was, and that's because Jacksonville went out and splurged in free agency, brought in a ton of receivers. Now this offseason, they have Calvin Ridley coming back after a suspension. So the numbers, and we saw it really the second half of the season with Jacksonville, he kind of became wide receiver 4. So it made sense why they wouldn't bring him back. But because of his age, there's not like a long-term really outlook here for Marvin Jones Jr. most likely. And essentially 6'2", 200 pounds. He has a similar build to a guy like Josh Reynolds, a little bit shorter than a guy like DJ Chark, but similar in terms of weight. As I said, he's 33 years old. He's wearing the number 11 in the clips that you'll see today, but he is wearing the number 0 for the Lions, which you're now allowed to do, so I'm excited about that. He ran a 4.46 40 coming out of the draft at the time from Cal. Assuming these numbers would be a little bit different now, they probably would be, but he still looks like a guy that can move. I will say that. 22 bench press reps is a thing that stands out big time. I think he's got a lot of route strength, which is one of the biggest differences to this room that I think he's going to bring is some of the strength that he has at this position. But you also look at the vertical, which wasn't crazy at the time, 33 inches. He wasn't the most explosive guy coming out, but he was fast. The guy could move. He had good speed scores. He had a solid agile score in terms of a 6.8 1.3 cone drill, which if you put that into this year's combine, I believe that would have been second behind Jackson Smith and Jigba. See, longer arms, big hands, over 10 inches, and then you take a look at some of the production there, specifically this past season, 46 receptions on 81 targets, 529 receiving yards, and 3 touchdowns. Really, the stats aren't much different from what DJ Chark did with us this past season. The biggest difference is that Jones Jr. was essentially healthy for the entire season, outside of a hamstring injury that took him out for one game, and then they had him recovering the next against the Giants, I believe. So he didn't miss much time, and he's been much healthier over the last few years than DJ Chark has. We know that he's kind of had the same injury reoccurring, unfortunately for him. So the production wasn't much different, but he was also healthy for most of the time. The difference for him is that as the season kind of went along, he started to sort of lose his role within the offense. However, the year before they had made all of the turnover changes, you can see how the production was still there. 73 receptions, 832 yards, 4 touchdowns. That's kind of consistently what it's been throughout his entire career. It was really this past season where we finally saw a little bit of a drop-off in his production. And again, that's probably part of the reason as well why he got the deal that he did, and that it wasn't huge in free agency. But I still feel like the Lions are getting a very productive player here. We went out in the draft. We addressed it with Jameson Williams a couple of years ago now with a first-round selection. Unfortunately, it was after this signing that the news came up that, hey, we have to deal with a suspension here. Talk about the kind of ways that that I feel like Marvin Jones Jr. can be really utilized within the offense, kind of based on what we saw a little bit last season and how it fits in with our quarterback strength. But with that being said, just looking at the stats alone, and I look back at last season, of course, we talked about the games we had and didn't have DJ Chark, but how about the games when we didn't have Josh Reynolds? And now some of this is also tied into when we didn't have DJ Chark, but if you do look at the statistics of the 4 straight games that we did not have Josh Reynolds, Green Bay, at Chicago, Giants, Bills, again, there were also other things that we were dealing with, a missed guard at the time, but statistically speaking, through that time, only one of those games did Jared Goff go over 20 completions. Also, only one of those games that he had 240 or more passing yards. That was actually his highest passing yards in that stretch. 5 touchdowns to 1 interception. That's it. So statistically speaking, some of it element, some of it other injuries as well. But it is something that kind of caught my eye when just taking a look of the impact of not having a guy like Josh Reynolds this past season. Drafted Jameson Williams when we did. The Lions didn't anticipate Jameson Williams, according to Brad Holmes, that he was really going to play this past season anyway. So I think a lot of the signing for DJ Chark was to kind of fill into some of the role that Jameson Williams ultimately would be for this Lions offense, but we weren't expecting to have him last year because of the rehab for the injury. It's just that he came along towards the end of the season. So I think that was part of that. Well, first, a couple of quotes that came from the head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars, Doug Peterson. He said this. He said, Marvin Jones Jr. was the go-to guy in certain situations for Trevor Lawrence. He's a very unselfish player, and I know he'll give 110% in 2023, whether that's basically with us or whether that's with someone else. You know what you're going to get in Marvin Jones Jr. Now, that wasn't exactly his quote, but that's what I've seen other people say, and I think that's 100% true. That's why I wrote it down in here. The role that I think he's going to be utilized in can be a little bit different than DJ Chark, and actually I think he can help out Josh Reynolds specifically because we talk about early in the season without Jamo what that's going to look like. I think he's going to be able to help out Josh Reynolds a little bit as well. Hopefully put him in a spot where we can more so just kind of lean into what he does well, because I was listening to David Shaw, the former head coach of Stanford now. To be successful in the NFL, you have to be able to get the ball down the field. Now, we know that we've been able to be successful in, play action situations, 1st and 10, that kind of thing. Look, we've been able to do that with St. Brown, with Josh Reynolds, with pretty much everybody is thrown out there. Specifically when Josh came along, we've been able to be successful in those spots. So I believe that's going to be there regardless, really. But I was thinking, how can we be effective? Like, what routes was Goff most effective on this past season? And does Marvin Jones Jr. tie into leaning into those strengths? And I believe that he does. One route that obviously stuck out to me big time, we'll start to look at some details here and I'll talk through some things. One route that stuck out to me big time was a lot of those back shoulder fades when we had one-on-one on one side of the field for DJ Chark this past season. We rarely had success throwing it, but we threw it a good amount of times. We took those chances. Buffalo, I have an example I can throw up on the screen. It was incomplete against Dane Jackson, but it was an example one-on-one. And then on the backside, we kind of run like the running back screen. And usually Goff goes up to the line, he can check the numbers, and he can decide what he wants to do from there. But he does have that isolated one-on-one. That's one of those examples where I said when we're just looking at the skill set of Marvin Jones Jr. from this past season and 2021, it's like that's an area where I think he could actually win those matchups more often than we saw with DJ Chark. Like, Marvin Jones Jr. has a skill set to win 50-50 balls more often. When you speak about his body control, his ability to play through contact, his sideline awareness, he has an ability to win those matchups. So he doesn't necessarily need separation. He can win in those spots. So we know back when he was with us the first time around, like Galladay, it was never about the separation numbers as much as it was like, okay, they're going to be contested, but they can win in contested situations. They can win in the red zone. It's one of the first things that I thought when I was watching, like, hey, this guy can win in the red zone. You could throw fades to him. That back shoulder fade that the Lions like to throw last year one-on-one is something that I anticipate that if Goff likes to throw that pass, a quick 1-2, put it up, like that kind of thing where it's like, hey, I decided I want to take that matchup, I think you're going to be more effective there with Marvin. Some of the in-breaking routes. According to Sharp Football Analysis, they went through some of the percentages of throws that Goff made between 1 and 10 yards. The highest number of those throws was out routes, about 30% of the time, similar to 2021. And, I think we saw a lot of that with the tight end TJ Hockenson. I think Sam Laporta can bring that back, and I don't expect that to go anywhere. St. Brown, all those guys can run those routes. Marvin runs those routes really well, speed out routes, things like that. Slant routes had a little bit of a boost, but the in-breaking routes jumped up to about 7% of the time. Goff had the highest yards per attempt at 12.83 on in-breaking routes, and also was 5th in EPA per dropback on those throws as well this past season. Now that was through December, so some of that probably changed a little bit towards the end of the season. Maybe it went up, maybe it went down a little bit, but it was a very big part of the route tree that we saw this past season. You could point to specific examples, third downs, just the scheme that we run, and a lot of the progression-based timing system that the Lions run. You had a lot of those, kind of crossing routes, which jumped up to about 15% of the time. The Lions threw those this past year, St. Brown, Khalif Raymond, guys like that. And then they would have that second level throw B, that deep dig route that Jared Goff liked to throw those types of routes. A lot of times we saw DJ Chark run those this past season. Well, I'll touch on some of the notes that I gave for Marvin Jones Jr. with just kind of breaking down the player. I won't go through everything here, but I'll kind of fly through this a little bit. Some of the grades that I gave out in certain aspects of his game. You start off with the release. Now, this is an area where I gave one of my lower grades, kind of just an average grade here for Marvin, because there's things that I like that he does, but there's things that I also didn't love about him. I thought he played with a really good rhythm at the line of scrimmage. He did a nice job of getting a nice jump off the line, played with some urgency, good timing. Sometimes you get some subtle movements like, ooh, that could have been a false start, but they don't call them because they're very slight. But he does a good job of getting urgently off the line of scrimmage. With that being said, though, I don't see as much of the explosiveness to consistently open up cornerbacks when they're playing him straight up, to force lunges, things like that. You don't get a lot of separation off the line immediately, specifically in press situations. Although I thought you had examples of late hand usage, which could allow the defender back into the play. What I like, and that slowed some timing, what I liked is that you did see a nice little variety of different releases that he could work to off the line of scrimmage, whether against a press or not against a press. You know, maybe it was just kind of 2 to 3 yards off. Against off coverage, you saw the effectiveness, the acceleration was still there, the ability to work some of those quick hitches, and we'll talk about that a little bit more into the stem. But you did see some variation when you watched him. For example, there was an example here against the Raiders, and this is kind of the best of both, right? You see the slide release that he utilizes here. It showed you some of the variation in his game. You can see how he pushes it up vertically, trying to open up potentially a fade, and you know, these things can all kind of tie together, right? So if you show it one way, it's like, okay, now if the cornerback starts to bite, next time I come around, I can really get him inside. So you get kind of the game that's played within the game there. But he did show you the ability to bring out a variation of a different release, the slide release in this example against the Raiders. The issue that even though he was able to pry open the inside and get inside, is that some of the late hands there kind of allowed the Raiders cornerback back into the play, as he was able to get his hands on him and kind of slow up the route a little bit there as he was breaking back inside. So I like the variation. He could be a little bit bland at times. For example, I saw a lot of speed releases. He also loves to go to the hesitation releases, which he's pretty effective at, specifically when he's trying to get over top using a hesitation release. He likes to use a lot of split releases where he kind of splits his feet and then he can read the defender and make a move from there. And he has some acceleration. So when he's clean, he can really get up the field and he can still run by guys. If they don't play it well, he can run right by you, especially if they can't get hands on him and they're trying to press. He can run right by a guy. However, I thought that too many times it was kind of basic, just utilizing maybe like a speed release and just seemingly run into contact. Like, they didn't always seem to be a fantastic plan. With that being said, though, I did like how he adapted. For example, when it was kind of like the defense was showing a blitz look. First off, you love the football intelligence as a whole, as the receiver here. That's one thing that I think is key. So go back to the quote that I said from Doug Peterson. Doug Peterson said he was the go-to guy in certain situations for Lawrence. Now, he didn't specify what those situations were. Of course, we saw a clutch grab against the Ravens. Could have tied the game. They went for 2, didn't get it. They lost that game. But he still technically would have had the touchdown that could have tied the game. Very clutch, went to him, broke, got up to the line very quickly, identified the matchup, and quickly got into it. But it was kind of that telepathic feel between him and the quarterback that showed up a lot. Adaptions at the line of scrimmage, adjustments from Trevor Lawrence, a lot of them going to Marvin Jones Jr. When they saw a certain look that they like, they would be on the same page, communicate, and then they would stay on the same page. The timing was excellent for Marvin. Not only have the Lions loaded up on football intelligent players in the back end defensively, but I think also at the weapons department. We talk about Sam Laporta and his understanding, able to run some of those stack routes, read the leverage of the defender. That's going to be key. Also, you have to have versatility. We've seen that in this offense over the past 2 years now. The tight end has to be able to run the same routes that an outside receiver can run. That way we can run some of these concepts, some of these timing routes based on different personnel packages. We can still hit you with similar concepts. And then finally, all the motion. Jacksonville was one of the heaviest motion teams early in the season. I don't know if it stayed that way, but they ran a lot of motion, and the Lions have been one of the top half teams at that, as we've seen as well, which means you're going to get your matchup to switch on the fly. So you have to be highly intelligent players to be able to run different routes, play through motion, read leverage of the defender on the fly. You have to be really intelligent in that sense to understand what you're seeing. And here's, just a specific example, I guess, where you can see the defender, as soon as he takes his eyes, Marvin Jones able to sink his body weight and then break back outside on this little whip route. But it's the patience. We saw similar things with Laporta with just that feel. You even saw that against the release. He would honestly speed up the process of the entire route, it felt like, if they would show blitz defensively and Lawrence could give him a little signal right before the snap, and it seemed like he would speed up the entire process to get through his route a little bit faster, starting with the release. So I loved all of those things. Really, the feel for him within the game I think is going to be huge for the Lions and for Jared Goff, just being a weapon in those certain spots, and that leads to some of the clutchness that you get as a player. While it's not always the most obvious, it's clearly there within his game. But at times the release tend to get a little bit high, and that could limit some of the explosiveness. And then, like I said, he gets hung up a little bit sometimes against press coverage. You saw it against cover 2, some of the late hands again there, they can kind of squeeze him outside. With that being said, though, I do love the urgency that he would get off the line with. Now, you kind of move that into the stem of the route, and this is where I think he can really make his money. I think he does make his money here through the stem of the route. The eye discipline. So you talk about the football intelligence, it's the discipline as a route runner that is huge. The discipline through the stem into his breaks, if he's going to show up field, he's going to show up field. He's going to run a straight line. He's going to keep his shoulders that way. He's going to keep his eyes that way. He's really going to sell all of the stem of the route. And he does a fantastic job of setting up defenders because of that. They really have to respect that, okay, he's actually going to go this way. And it doesn't really waver for the most part. I mean, occasionally you'll get the sense that he's starting to kind of slow into his break, but for the most part, he can really sell the heck out of a route. And why you get the tell is when his sides will become a little bit smaller, and you'll see that he'll raise up a little bit because he's trying to break into a first or second level route. But with that being said, though, he does a great job of showing discipline because his waist, where defenders are watching, he keeps that discipline. He does a great job pumping his arms, really showing and trying to sell the route, and then keeping that eye discipline throughout the route as well. And I'll end up touching on this a little bit later, but understanding to get in front of the defender, and you can see here he comes to balance, splits up the defender. You can see him start to pedal into his outside leverage, and because the corner tries to get back on top, you see that subtle move to make sure that he gets him back outside so that he can cross his face and win that inside leverage in the red zone. But again, he can give a little bit of a tell, like this example where he starts to shorten up his stride, lift a little bit, and then you have to have those ready hands because you can get held up a little bit. What I do like is how he pushes the toes of an off coverage cornerback like this situation. And then again, like this, kind of playing the sticks here as a corner, you have to have that physicality at the top route, and that he does to hold his ground. If you think back to these last couple of years, Lions ran a lot of routes like this where it was 3rd and 10, and we run just deep curls all on the sticks, and you were hoping that someone would separate. He's been a guy that's been pretty reliable because top of the route, he's physical, subtle movements, leans into it, and then pushes utilize like that long lunging step into, breaking himself down at the top of the route for hitches, whatever that may be, underneath, whether that's a deeper route, and that allows him to really slam on the brakes. With that being said, though, you'll see him adapt depending on if he needs more space, what the defense is doing. If it's a cover 4, for example, and he's running a dig route and he has a little more space, he may take some of those smaller steps, work a little bit slowly into the zone, not kind of run through it, work the timing a little bit more, and stay straight to the line. And then you tie it all in with the flexibility that he still brings. Yeah, he's a very flexible route runner in the sense that you see the bend, you see the lower body flexibility, the ability to run the speed outs. You saw it against the Ravens there, against a cornerback that was not trying to bite, but you see the flexibility to get through those routes, angle those routes, and still create separation, while also understanding I'm limited how far I can get outside. So I need to pace that well. That way I'm not running myself out of bounds. This sideline awareness is super clear when you watch him. The toe taps, you get all of those things when you watch him. He wins double moves consistently. I think a lot of that comes back to the stem, the discipline that he shows, the pacing of the routes, the subtle little movements through the stem of the route, the stop and start kind of routes downfield, those kind of things tied along with the hand usage and the ability to quickly accelerate. Now, as we know, a lot of times these double moves is a two-way street. Quarterback has to sell it, but what I like, again, pressing the toes of the corner, and then he's able to maintain a lot of speed out of that break. And it's a little bit rounded. It's kind of like how Chark ran those this past season, but he really maintained speed because of that. And then again, these subtle little movements through the stem, they're the little stutter, and then the break back inside against a younger corner. Here, like Gilmore, he stays on top of the route, doesn't get that immediate step on top of the corner, and he doesn't consistently do that, at least this past season. But again, you're in the NFL, so you can't really expect to win like that, and he doesn't have that kind of speed. So for him, it's those subtle little movements and then the discipline that can get him over top. Ability to stick some of his routes at the top of the route really tight. So for me, where I also like is the way that he can take his stem working into the top of the route really well. Route strength. I think this is an area of the game that he brings out the outside receiver position that we don't necessarily have to this extent. All right, like if you look at our outside receivers, we don't really have a guy including last year when we had DJ, that was really strong, I thought, on the outside in terms of just route strength. Like, that was one of his biggest strengths as a route runner. And I never realized that this is what it was for Marvin Jones Jr., but now really focusing and watching him, it makes sense that, you know, his separation numbers aren't always huge, and a lot of that's the route tree, right? If you're running certain routes, your separation is not going to be gigantic. However, the route strength is massive. Now, that shows up at the catch point, of course, all the contested grabs that you'll see him make, the 50-50 balls, but also it shows up at the top of the route as well. The ability to separate at the top of the route when he has no separation. Physical in the upper body. He's strong in the upper body. He understands where the break points are, so breaking at the elbow, at the wrist. Didn't see any offensive pass interference. I can't think of one that I saw in all the games I watched. I did not see one OPI from Marvin Jones Jr. for being called for pushing off, because he's very subtle. He works into the body of the cornerback. He looks and seeks out some of the physicality, but also as a play breaks down, he understands how to shed and create space late, and he does a really nice job of it. It's hard for cornerbacks to stick with him because he's got a lot of route strength. You'll see it's difficult for them to slow him down, especially if he has a full head of speed working into the third level. They'll try to get contact and he just plays right through it, and then that's when you get in trouble, because as a corner, for example, if they're trying to crowd him to the sideline, he plays through it. So you don't really get examples of guys crowding him and pushing him out of bounds. He plays through it, and that's when you get him taking a step, and that's when you get some of those instances where you can just put it right over top of the cornerback, get him on some of those, just those straight go routes on the outside. But it's that strength that I think that he brings, contact on double moves, and then really sink at the top of the route. And this is most impressive to me when it's like the level one underneath routes. Really the ability to sink, stop on a dime. The multiple examples in 2021, and I saw it more in 2021, of when he's running a hitch route on the outside and the cornerback's falling down. Because again, the discipline, the way he sells it upfield. The start and finish is nice on both these. You get the motion and the speed out breaking route. You see the discipline. There I like how he works himself back to the football late in the play, the ability to adjust. And then this one, the toe tapping on the sideline with discipline to force that cornerback to get depth. But the immediate ability to sink and stop on the dime is so darn impressive. That long step that he takes to sink and sit, then you'll see cornerbacks just completely fall down and have to recover. But then you see it underneath too. Now, he doesn't bring the lateral quickness or the shiftiness to be like, hey, I want to always give him the two-way go. I don't think he necessarily brings that. But because of his ability to separate underneath, it does allow him to fit in well with a lot of the stacks and the bunches and the tight alignments that we ran last season. Teams like the Rams like to run. Those kind of things. It allows him to have success because it almost turns you into a slot based on where you're aligned pre-snap. And for him, like, you see him separate underneath with how sharp those cuts are tied along with the play strength. He slowly, sometimes not always the cleanest, because again, his release I think can be a little bit too, late hands, or I think it's a little bit bland. And again, he has that acceleration in the first 10 yards where if it's a bailing cornerback, if he's playing off coverage, to really, again, sink down and be able to slam on the brakes and consistently attack with some of those curl routes, those quick hitters, that kind of thing. Now, when it comes to the catch point, this is where you get the exciting plays. It's not all perfect here, though. I gave him a good grade. I gave him an above average grade in this area. It's not all perfect, though. You get some fantastic catches, which to me all points back to excellent body control. That's where he wins. The flexibility, the fluidity, the way that he adapts to the ball mid-air, the tracking, like all of those things you fall in love with. And then it's also the other thing, where's the sideline? Toe tapping the sideline. The late hands are great. This is huge 50-50 situations. Again, back shoulder fades, not giving it up early. When you run a back shoulder fade, if you turn around and you're just looking for the football, it's easy for the cornerback to defend. But when you're able to very late make that quick reaction to attack the football, it makes it difficult because the cornerback, he really does a good job of limiting the strike zone of a cornerback when he's in some of those 50-50 contested situations with great timing, tracking, but then also bringing out late hands on the play as well. What you don't love is that he is kind of a pure possession receiver in the sense that he doesn't really allow himself to do a lot after the catch in a lot of situations. Now, sure, if you naturally give him like a crossing route and it's open and he can catch and run, he'll get you some extra yards. But he really limits himself here because you'll see him. He leaves the ground on chest-high passes. He tries to put his body in front. He kind of traps the football rather than plucking it out in front of him. He doesn't always look that natural in terms of, technique, reaching out in front of him, chest-high passes, maybe a little bit higher, and just snagging the football. It looks like a lot of times he's catching the front of the football and you'll see it kind of just bobble out. But because of that, for him, he likes to let the ball kind of get to him and then trap it. Now, that doesn't mean he can't catch. You can be a guy that traps and body catches and still be a very good pass catcher. His career drop rate is 4.37%. doing the math according to PFF. That's fantastic. He's a great pass catcher. He's very reliable. He just will occasionally give you an ugly drop because he does trap the football. And where that gets you is like Dallas, where you'll see it jar it loose when it gets on his body. Or like I said, the one where, he's trying to reach out for it and he kind of gets the front of the football and he just drops it. He gets some really ugly drops where you're like, how did he drop that pass? But he lets the ball get on it. He tries to kind of match the trajectory of where the ball is going with his body and align himself in those spots. And because of that, even if he catches it, it really limits any ability after the catch because he's jumping, leaving the ground for a ball that's on his chest, and then it's hard to catch, get back on the ground, and then take off. Now, I think these two things are different. Number one, I think he understands leverage and positioning and needing to get in front of the defender. However, on the flip side, I think at the same time, you would like him to be more aggressive attacking the football. He kind of waits for it to get to him a little bit, and that makes some contested situations, and then it forces him to really kind of pull the ball down through contact. With that being said, I think he shows up when he's in the slot, working over routes. He doesn't have the straight run away from you speed, so when he kind of starts to fade through the top of the route instead of attacking the ball, again, you can allow for contested situations. What we like is back to the FBI standpoint in terms of the catch point is the way that he finds the zone holes, the way that he understands timing. He's consistently on time. When you talk about the feel in the offense, it comes back to knowing where the guy's going to be. Consistently being on time, being where he's supposed to be within the progression of the offense. Now, every once in a while, you'll get him slightly held up. You'll get him held up at the top of the route when the sync isn't always perfect, and he'll be a little off from where the ball is in terms of timing. He'll be a tick late. But for the most part, in terms of if it's not that and he just needs to be where he's supposed to be, his timing is going to be pretty precise all the time. I that with the ability to kind of sink his way into zone holes, whether that's working at the second level, some of those dig routes underneath, slowly finding zone holes, or if the play breaks down, getting himself open. Like, this is another area where I don't think the Lions are great. Receivers that find a way to make themselves present when the play breaks down. He does that all the time. He is huge when the play breaks down. The amount of broke down plays that he makes a play on because he finds a way to just get himself open is huge. And again, it comes back to the physicality, I think, and then the body control. As soon as the ball hits the air, he's able to weirdly adapt his body and make a crazy catch. Now, where he is very natural is those outside of his frame passes. Like when they get away from him, the body control, the flexibility, and then also specifically on touch passes, he makes it look so easy. He's got big hands, and you'll see him pull out those big mitts and just pluck the pass. You'll just see him pluck the ball, very quick to tuck, transition. So again, while he's limiting everything that he can do after the catch, he's pretty reliable in the sense that he's going to bring the ball in. He doesn't necessarily have the softest hands either. Like, it's not the smoothest process as a pass catcher because he likes to trap it a little bit more with his body, but he's reliable. So you kind of take it as however it looks, he's a reliable pass catcher. Good concentration through tip passes, things like that. Some of the issues on some of the low passes, trying to scoop it up off the ground, it just looks like, the ball kind of gets through his hands, late hands in that sense, and trying to scoop it off the turf, it's not the most natural thing, but he's very good outside of his frame. A lot of the touch passes, because a lot of times when plays break down, you're not rifling it in there, you're kind of tossing it up, and that's where he's tough because he can adapt to the football and make some beautiful catches. And we know Goff doesn't throw the hardest ball either, so a lot of those touch passes, he's much more natural. The run after catch is not really a big part of his game. I gave him a pretty poor grade here because there's not a lot that he does outside of the design. Even when he throws him screens, like there was one time I saw him kind of juke out a guy, but it wasn't like, super agile looking. He's just not super explosive, not very dynamic. He's not a home run hitter when he gets the ball, not going to make a lot of guys miss. The biggest positive is that he's pretty strong and he'll kind of battle through and pick up maybe an extra 1 to 2 yards depending on how he has the football. Savviness, I gave him a great grade there, as well as body control, clutchness, football intelligence, and as route running, I gave him a really nice grade as well. Ball tracking, where I gave my lower grades is kind of playmaking with the football. Contested catches are it's slightly above average. Run after catch, I gave him a pretty poor grade there. The release is kind of average. There's things that I like. There's upside to separate underneath because he's physical, but he's not, the guy's consistently going to open up guys off the line. He just has a really good feel. He's unselfish, as Doug Peterson put it. He understands, how do I open up my teammates? Taking attention. There's a good example against the Jets. The way that he takes attention from Sauce Gardner to open up the underneath route. The way that he plays in some of those stack or switch releases to say, okay, I got to play it this way. That way I can open up the other guy next to me. Like, I don't need to be the guy that's getting the ball. The way that he sets up zone coverage, and when there's a drag underneath that, he'll kind of slow down his route, hold that outside corner. Try to make guys focus on him so he can open up somebody else. Very good at doing those things. He has a really good sense of the game, and he's going to be a quarterback's best friend in that sense. And I think he'll be really good as just kind of a leader by example for the guys like Jameson and things like that. Yet, I think he'll be impactful immediately, especially because of the suspension of Jameson. I think he'll be impactful for the Lions. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you, Brad, for watching, and I'm